Well, we are in Thursday of the third week of Lent, and we're looking again at, because we're skipping around, this is, as you know, what I comment on is the first reading of every Mass, and so whatever the first reading is, and as I've mentioned to you before, in ordinary time, you tend to follow the readings along, so you may read excerpts from one of the books for like a week or maybe even 2 weeks, and then you'll go to another book. Whereas, as you can see here during Lent, we're skipping around. So if you think about it, we've gone from Kings to Daniel to Deuteronomy, and now we're in Jeremiah. And we're in Jeremiah chapter 7. Now, most of this part of Jeremiah, which is chapter 7, and we could say and following, are what the New American Bible Revised Edition calls oracles. And this is actually for about 14 chapters. But these are oracles. So an oracle, as you know, regardless of what religion you're talking about. Remember, there was the oracle at Delphi, and you have all these oracles, and this is the prophet Jeremiah speaking to the people, explaining to them, the leaders of the people mostly, explaining to them that they've got to turn their hearts back to the Lord. Now, one of the things that we always want to look at is that why do people turn away from the Lord? Well, we can see that as well today. First, let's go back to the basic teaching. What is the basic teaching? We find it in Genesis, that constant struggle between doing God's will, being humble before the Lord and accepting God's will, or doing our own will. And it's that humble acceptance. And what God is explaining is if you follow His will, you will always have a peaceful nation, and a nation that's filled with the justice that He brings. So we look at that. We see all of that. But what happens is people come to points in their lives where they say, well, we don't need God anymore. Or we want our kind of God. That's another big thing. The God we want is our kind of God, not the God that is described. And you see that a lot today. People will describe their kind of God. That's what I want. One of my favorite examples of that is the story, and I'm not going to mention their names, of the famous couple who were preachers and great fundraisers. They were master fundraisers and preachers during the 70s and 80s. Well, no, I guess during the 80s, because they were very popular during the Reagan administration, when you had a very strong influence of a lot of the evangelical and more fundamentalist Christianity. And they were part of all that. And they would preach what Jesus taught, and Jesus would say this, Jesus would say that. And eventually there was a scandal. The husband ended up in prison, and while he was in prison, he admitted when he got out of prison that he read the Bible for the first time in his life. He never read the Bible before, and he'd been preaching the Bible for years. He was preaching his own version of God. And this is what happens when we turn away from the Lord, rather. But even more so when we think we're following the Lord, but we're not. And this is what Jeremiah is saying. He's saying you've turned away from the Lord. So you're walking down your own path, and you don't realize it. And what's happening is, and eventually they do realize it because they don't care, you're walking down your own path. But remember, God is God. Therefore, God knows the outcome that you and I don't know. A good example of this was something that I think was from a mystical source, and that was when the United States was going to march into Iraq. Pope John, this is, I think this was Gulf War I. When they were going to march into Iraq, Pope John Paul II said, do not do this. Yeah, it was. Do not do this, because this will the humanity will be the destruction to humanity will be intense. Well, we're still in Iraq. We were there to rebuild the nation and everything else. We're still in Iraq. And of course, now we're dealing with Iran. And I think the Pope saw that if we walked into Iraq, and I can't remember whether it was the first or second, but in any case, if we walked into Iraq, if we marched into Iraq, it would be disastrous. And so he warned not to do that. I think that was a mystical experience. And that was one of the things that we look at. And, it's a fascinating thing, and it really shows this dynamic as well. When the Pope was speaking, this is Pope John Paul II, when he was speaking against abortion, many of the more traditional Catholics, I shouldn't put it that way because then it implies the ones going to Latin Mass. Not necessarily. But I hate to use conservative and liberal. I just hate to do that. But maybe I'll use it for this example. Sometimes that's the only thing that works. So the more politically conservative said, yes, that's great. The Pope is speaking out. And the people who are more politically liberal would say, why doesn't he mind his own business? But then when he said, don't march into Iraq, all the conservatives were saying, why doesn't he mind his own business? And the liberals were going, yes, yes. And you're going to find this all the time because Catholic teaching is neither conservative or liberal. It's Catholic teaching. But you can see that the Lord knows more of what's coming than you and I. And so when you look at that and you see what's going on and you see that Jeremiah is saying, it's God is speaking through Jeremiah saying, I'm preaching to you people to turn your way back, but you don't listen. You don't do what I say. And you are stiff-necked. You do things your own way. And he is warning that if you continue to do that, disaster is coming. But in all civilizations, when they are confronted with that reality, they will come back with, that is not possible because our country, our empire, our whatever is eternal. And that's the Romans did that. All the great empires did that. We are the great source of whatever. And all the great empires did that. No, we're eternal. I always like to explain when I was visiting Rome and you're looking at the Forum and the people believed that the Forum, which is all ruins right now, was eternal. That was a sign that the Roman Empire was here forever. Well, obviously that isn't true. So the people aren't listening to God, and God is saying, this is what is coming. And so this is one of the things that is happening and all that. Now, maybe I should say something here. What is Jeremiah saying? Jeremiah is saying, turn back to the Lord. That's what you know to do. That's what to do. Be careful of these people who will teach you, oh, this is what's coming in the future. Oh, if this is the warning. God calls to conversion. And if you start listening to this, people will say, well, this is what's going to happen in the future. This is what people, that's not the same message, because the message is turn back to the Lord. And the Lord will get you through whatever is the issue. But if you don't listen to that, and you may start listening to these other people, some of them call themselves Catholic, some of them call themselves Catholic priests, who will tell you about different signs and warnings and omens and all the other stuff. That's not the message of the prophets. The prophets was always come back to the Lord. And that's why you want to be careful of all these people who are teaching signs and omens and the mark of the beast and all the other stuff. Be careful of these people, because you have no idea whether they're speaking the truth. The only thing you can know is how much you believe in them. And some of them, I don't believe anything in them, except for what we know is established revelation. So they may be speaking what is known as personal revelation. The church has never pronounced on it. It is not required to listen to, and you're saying, well, this is what he said is the sign, and you're looking for the sign. No, your whole thing, what is the sign? To return back to the faith, to always be humble before the Lord. That's what we're called to do. That's our message, and that is Jeremiah's message. But what is Jeremiah saying in the midst of that? the people aren't turning back. The people aren't returning to the Lord. The people aren't doing all these things. And this is one of the things to look for, to be aware of. Because remember, Jeremiah has got the worst example of people turning away from the Lord. Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And those were the two prophets who were speaking at the time that preceded the Babylonian exile and that was the Babylonian exile. And eventually they would preach to the people to not lose heart after the actual attack from the Babylonians who'd bring the people into exile and destroy the temple. So you understand that they are speaking for the Lord and they're all calling people to repent. That's the message. That's the important message. Be careful of all these people who are just giving prophecy and this is what's going to happen and this is the sign and this is, because none of that is formally established. None of it is. It is personal revelation. It doesn't mean anything. So keep that in mind. But now he's preaching and he's telling the people how it's important that they come back. And what is the issue? Yes, but we're doing things the way we think they should be done, and it's all working out fine. And they're not seeing the great damage that is happening. Plus, they may not be seeing the great division that they are creating. Because in every society that walks down that path, you will always find the very rich and the very poor. Always. And so the very, very rich and the very, very poor are divided, and the more unjust a society becomes, the more that division happens. And so you have this. And the Lord is always calling us to live in a just society. And if you live in a just society, everyone will experience justice. Doesn't mean that everyone will be rich or everyone will be poor, but everyone will experience the joy of the Lord and living in a society that was filled with the joy of the Lord. That's what the Lord calls people to. But then they get distracted and they walk down another path and they say, no, we want things this way. And remember, they were practicing idolatry. Always remember that's a warning sign. When they're practicing idolatry, that's the number one commandment. That's the warning sign. That is when you turn away from the Lord and you start following the other ways. And remember, the other ways were pretty intense. And you could probably also expect there were some pretty heavy taxes involved with this and pretty heavy. It's just a mess. So then what happens is the Babylonians conquered Judah. It's because they didn't listen to the warnings and they didn't have the strength. Remember, prior to that, after the Assyrians, this is 200 years prior, after the Assyrians had conquered Israel, the northern kingdom, remember they were about to conquer Judah, and Judah converted. This was 200 years prior, and they returned to the Lord, and the Lord said, then I will take care of Assyria, and he did. All of Sennacherib's men got sick. They got a tremendous virus, and he had no army to fight. The Lord took care of it. It's a similar story, by the way, in Christian times of the death of Arius. Arius was very similar situation. Of course, Arius is one person. But what happened was Arius was preaching this heresy that basically was against the Trinity, and basically that Jesus was created and not one in substance with the Father, and all the stuff that went with it. And finally, he converted back, but the bishop knew for a fact. He says, no, he's lying. He just said the Apostles' Creed. He's lying. And now he's coming to receive communion again. The bishop said he's lying, and he's going to use this to continue spreading his heresy. And the bishop begged the Lord not to let this happen. And Arius was on his way to receive his first communion, his first Mass, after saying the Creed. And he is going to attend the Mass, and he had to go to the bathroom really bad. He went to the bathroom really bad and died. That's what happened to Arius. The bishop prayed that Arius would not receive his communion. It's a very similar story to what happened to the soldiers that were following Sennacherib. So we see all that. We recognize that. And this is that message of Jeremiah calling the people back, but they're not listening. And so God does not intervene. And we know out comes the Babylonian exile, which becomes this very core period of time in the history of the Jews. We're going to be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We'll be right back right after this. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media Podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media, patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer, previews of upcoming podcasts, previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com, your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. And so we've been talking about that powerful message. So this is one of the things to look at. Always be careful of someone who says, yes, I'm a Christian. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But be careful of that, because Jesus didn't say by their names or by their titles or by their religion you would know them. He says by their fruits. And we're called to live the fruits. And one of the issues that happens is that, especially I could say in this country, I had an experience back when I was in Ecuador, and there was this at the time there was a radio station, I don't know if it's still around, on the top of the Andes in Quito, Ecuador, which is the capital city of Ecuador, and it was called HCJB. And actually, as much as it was there in the country, and it was essentially run by or licensed to the Ecuador, it was run by a lot of Christian evangelists here from the United States, because you got to realize that Quito is very high in the mountains, and so when you're sending out shortwave, you have a tower that is, I think it was 11,000 feet in the air, 9,000, 11,000 feet in the air. That, and it's shortwave, that's going to go far. And that was HCJB. So I was with some British students, and medical students, and you do realize that in England, the state owns the means of communication. And one of the reasons for that is because they want to control the people. So, the whole mission, at least originally, was to decide what the people needed to hear and how they needed to hear it. That's an important thing, because if I don't know if I assume they still do it. If you listen to, there's a special way of speaking, or always has been, on the BBC. And that special way of speaking is to speak in a way that no matter what you say, the people don't get upset. So I know my accent's going to be bad. So the Queen went to the bathroom this morning can have the same, be done with the same affect, the same expression as there was a nuclear bomb exploded in Cairo. So when you're listening to it, you can go, well, they're very calm. Does that mean that this isn't anything to worry about? That's the way the BBC worked. I don't know if they still do. I mean, I listen to the BBC when I want to catch news and stuff like that, but for that the news on the hour, that's the way they would do it. And it was designed not to get people upset over the news. And so that's how they did it. Well, so anyway, and that was all part of the state owning, the state owning the broadcast system. Well, so here we were in Ecuador, and the HCJB was broadcasting American preachers in English, and the British had never heard this before because they didn't have this in this country. And I said, yes, this is very common, and it's preaching, this evangelical preaching, and it's going out and preaching all this Christian stuff, and Christian stuff. You know what I mean? Nothing wrong with that. I mean, I was on a Christian radio station. I've encouraged the Archdiocese to go on a Christian radio station. Why? Because if you don't, then there is no Catholic material on the Christian radio station. But I won't go there. So, and people will say, well, we already have our own Catholic radio network. Well, that's another discussion too. But in any case, you've got this preaching and this Christian preaching. Well, they had never heard that before, and they had never understood that before. And you realize that's not necessarily a Catholic vision of what's being broadcast. And there's nothing wrong with that. You kind of want to judge what you hear and see whether or not it's within what Catholicism teaches or not. I know a lot of people, myself included, who loved listening to Charles Stanley. And Charles Stanley was not Catholic, but he had great messages, and you can still hear his messages. In Touch Ministries is still going on. And he basically preached a lot of the Bible and would explain it in a very simple way, very powerful way. He was not Catholic, and people still loved him, and I greatly enjoyed listening to Charles Stanley. So you want to be discerning, and this is one of the powerful messages that you see here. And this is part of what we see in Jeremiah. People could preach that, no, we don't have to follow that way. You don't have to follow the Ten Commandments anymore. You have to, and Jeremiah is saying, no, that's not true. And because you're not listening and you're following your own way, you're walking down the path to disaster. We have that today. It's really fascinating. We have that today, that same walking down the path to disaster if you're not discerning. And that's why you want to be careful. One of the major issues that you see is, this was especially during Pope Francis's time, is people would say some pretty awful things about Pope Francis. And and they'd say, no, he's wrong, and this is not the way. Well, who are you to make that statement? Who are you to make that statement? You may not agree with something he says and maybe want to look deeper into it, but who are you to make that statement? And that's an important message, and people would follow these people, say, oh, what was it? There's one of these pundits out there from the Catholics who used to call Pope Francis the evil Pope. Those, and people would listen to say, oh, we have to listen to what Francis, we have to reject what Francis says and everything. Those are all big warning signs that people would say things like that, even if you disagree with Pope Francis. But say things like that because that's a warning sign that is lead you down the wrong path. Let me put it to you in a different way. The church calls you to listen to what the church says that is in church teaching. Calls you to do that as best you can. It's right in Catholic teaching that no one can follow Catholic teaching perfectly. And that's why you have the sacraments to help you out and to guide you and everything else. That's the Lord, through the sacraments, helps us and strengthens us in our faith and everything else. That's the whole thing. And it is part of Catholic teaching that you can't live Catholic teaching perfectly. That's why we have the sacrament of reconciliation, also known as penance, also known as confession. It's got more names. It's got tons of names. So that's what we believe. That's it. But at least you know that established Catholic teaching is there. When someone turns around and says, Pope so-and-so said this, don't listen to him, then that's a warning sign to you that this man may or woman may not be speaking in something that is inspired by the Holy Spirit. Put it really simply that way. And that's why we have Catholic teaching. Remember, what is the role of the bishops? The role of the bishops is basically, to be those who discern what is that's their most fundamental role, that and preaching the message, but to discern what is and is not Catholic teaching. So and the bishops as a body have more power than each individual bishop, but each individual bishop has the ultimate authority in his particular diocese. And the Pope has the authority in the whole church, and when he speaks ex cathedra, only when he speaks ex cathedra is he infallible. There's always this discussion of whether what the Pope says is infallible, only when he speaks ex cathedra. Only. Now, why is all this important, and why is this a powerful message? Because we want to discern what is the truth, but we want to be careful of anyone who says, oh, no, you don't listen to that. Oh, no, the Pope is wrong here. That's where you end up walking through a door that leads you away from not only what the Lord has called us to believe and follow, but to a whole different message that may lead you completely astray. That's why you want to be careful of all this. And it was fascinating during the reign of Pope Francis, and even they came up with the word Pope-splainer. If you supported the Pope, you were condemned as a Pope-splainer. That's heresy, what these people are speaking. And people who said that basically were heretics. The Pope didn't necessarily step in on it, but if someone were to say to me, well, you're a Pope-splainer, then that person from that point on has nothing to say to me. They can offer me a free glass of milk, for example, and I wouldn't listen to them. You see what I'm saying? We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Going back to receive your high school diploma can make a huge difference in your life. Not just for you, but for your loved ones and your community as well. Across the country, thousands of free adult education centers are ready to help with teachers who will guide you every step of the way. Find free and supportive adult education centers near you at finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council, and the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at CatholicAudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out. Patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back, and tomorrow we're going to be looking at Hosea, another powerful message from Hosea, and that's, of course, the one where Hosea, which we see in the reading tomorrow, is calling the people back. That's always that case. So we'll talk about Hosea tomorrow. In the meantime, I don't know if you know, I have what is known as the Catholic Audio Media Substack. It's CatholicAudiomedia.substack.com. My subscribers have been going up quite a bit, and we've been very good. I think in the past month, let me see if I can figure this out. I've gotten a lot so I really appreciate everyone who is subscribing. In the past month, I've got 10 more subscribers, and over 600 views on the Substack over the past month. So really appreciate that. If you want to check it out, it's CatholicAudiomedia.substack.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.substack.com. So if you want to subscribe. By the way, don't forget to subscribe and to comment and to like on this podcast. You can find it on various podcast platforms. Really enjoy when you do that, and you can help me to further the podcast, but also to help me to strengthen the podcast, to increase, or not increase, to improve. That's the word I was looking for, improve the podcast. Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow. Have yourself a blessed day. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.